Welcome to Crime Solvers, where we pick a crime and then analyze the means, opportunity, and motive to help solve the mystery. Here are your hosts, retired police officer and crime analyst Dale Lawrence and journalist college professor Dave Rattigan.
We're calling this one Southern Injustice, the suspicious death of Grant Solomon. Dale?
So in this week's case, we're going to be looking at it strictly from an objective law enforcement investigatory perspective. What I mean by that is we're going to present information based on police reports, independent accident investigation findings, and observations from accident scene photos. We're going to also point out any inconsistencies that Grant Solomon died as a result of a tragic motor vehicle accident.
The case here is this. Grant Solomon officially died in a motor vehicle accident, but there are some people that think it was suspicious. From our perspective, let's say we've turned up a few areas where maybe the investigation was a little inconsistent. Is that a good way to put it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the question you can ask yourself, was it homicide? Was it premeditated murder?
Which is what some people allege.
Absolutely, that's what's being alleged. But you can make up your own mind as you listen along to the podcast. Feel free to make your own conclusions on what we present.
As we might have said already, it's been pretty widely reported.
Social media, the true crime community, numerous media sites all across the country.
Right, and there are advocates that basically say somebody's got to take a better look at this.
Absolutely, and that's why we're taking a more law enforcement perspective look at it, which is a little different than how it's been looked at in the past.
What's intriguing about this case is the backstory. We'll touch more on that in the motive section of the podcast. So let's go with the case info. On the morning of Monday, July 20th, 2020, Grant Solomon, who was 18, was reportedly struck by his own truck in a fatal parking lot accident. According to his father, Aaron Solomon, a former WSMV Channel 4 news anchor in Nashville, Tennessee, and the only witness to his son's death, Grant parked his truck at the Ward Performance Institute, a baseball training center in Gallatin, Tennessee. He went to get his baseball gear from the bed of his truck when it unexplainably rolled backward, dragging him 60 feet across the rocky asphalt pavement, down a hill, and into a rock-filled ditch. Aaron says he was parked next to Grant and that he was inside his own vehicle checking work emails on his cell phone when he realized what had happened.
So that brings us to the first inconsistency.
Yes.
As we go forward in the podcast, you're going to find that the police department, Gallatin PD, did a less than adequate investigation.
Right.
First thing they could have looked at here, Aaron says he was on his phone at the time Grant stepped out of his truck and was run over by the truck. All they would have had to have done was to do a forensic exam of his phone and see when he accessed his emails or text messages. That was never done. So that statement in and of itself, you can't verify that. You can only take it at Aaron's word.
This is one of those things, we've talked about this before, that when you do the initial investigation, even when somebody says it's an accident, cops are trained to verify everything.
Absolutely. Look outside the box. Be analytical, abstract thinker. We're going to get into that more in depth going forward.
But of course, we've seen oftentimes when it involves an important person or an important family, it seems that cops take the word of the grieving father, the grieving mother, the grieving husband. And as we know from true crime everywhere, that is often not
As a
course of
cop,
action.
and we've said this hundreds of times on both podcasts, you cannot trust anyone.
So Grant was taken to the hospital by an ambulance, pronounced dead at 9:30 a.m. Cause of death, cardiac arrest and blunt force trauma to the back of his head. Aaron called 911 at 8:44 a.m. from the parking lot. Here's the audio from the 911 call.
My son's truck backed over him, and it's rolled over him and dragged him into the ditch, and it's on top of him. He's trapped under the truck, and I somehow it drug him underneath it. Yes, my son is under it. I'm trying to call 911.
Okay, what's your name?
Oh my God, my name is Aaron Solomon.
And you said
Oh my God.
1357 South Water Avenue, right?
Yes.
How old
yes.
is the male?
He's 18. He just turned 18 a couple weeks about a month. It's my son. Oh my God, this is not good.
Is he awake and
Oh, please
talking
hurry.
to you?
I don't think so. He's not alert, right? No, he's out. and he's trapped. I got 3 guys here, and he's trapped under the truck. Oh my God.
So this brings us to the second inconsistency.
Second inconsistency, just to give you a little background. So I was an officer in Massachusetts for 32 years. Every officer in Massachusetts, state police, local police, is trained as a 911 operator and dispatcher. Over my 32 years, I've taken thousands of 911 calls. Many of those calls have to do with a parent, a loved one calling, upset, crying, anxiety because their loved one, they found them possibly deceased from a drug overdose, from suicide, they were involved in an accident. And when you get one of those gut-wrenching 911 calls, when someone is injured, they stick with you for the rest of your life. What I heard, or what I didn't hear in Aaron's voice, was what I've heard hundreds of times over 32 years. When his child is underneath a truck, possibly dying, we found out that obviously he did die. That tone in his voice, for me, was not convincing at all. That's the first inconsistency. Second inconsistency, he talks about 3 other men on that scene.
Right.
And when the cops showed up 4 minutes later, those men were gone. And what I also know about accidents is when someone is injured, if someone's under a vehicle, if someone is drowning, people will go to great lengths to help that person, especially a child. So those 3 people, whoever they were, did they flee that scene so fast and they didn't even try to help this young kid who's trapped under a truck dying? It just doesn't make any sense. I remember a 911 call years ago. There was a house on fire, and there was a parent calling. One of her children was in the house. We had to tell her, do not go in the house. The fire department and police officers will be there within seconds. She was having none of it. She ran into the house. She was able to find her child. However, fire department personnel had to go rescue her and the child. People will do anything to save their child.
Well, there's that story you always hear about when the 100-pound mom finds the strength to lift the car.
Lifts the truck off a person. You're telling me that 3 possibly grown men, to include Aaron, 4 grown men, couldn't have picked that truck up just a few inches and dragged Grant from underneath the truck? Absolutely they could have. So that's our second very obvious, glaring inconsistency.
That's interesting, but of course I heard him and I thought this was a guy who was very agitated. He's calling 911, but you're saying there wasn't enough panic in his voice.
From my experience, no. Now, he's a cool customer.
Well, he's also a reporter.
He's a reporter, so he has to maintain his bearing. However, I think when it's your child, your loved one, that reporter mentality or that reporter bearing is going to break down and you're going to just be a parent.
Let's take a look at who Aaron and Grant are before we get to means, opportunity, and motive. Aaron Solomon was a highly respected news anchor at Channel 4 WSMV. He's the father of Grant and a daughter, Gracie. His former wife, Angela.
I think she goes by Angie.
Angie?
Yes.
Okay. Angie is a doctor of pharmacy. Aaron Solomon was a board member and advocate for Our Kids Tennessee, which provides medical evaluations and counseling for victims of child sexual abuse. He has been accused by his daughter, Gracie, of past sexual abuse. We'll discuss this further when we talk about possible motive. Grant Solomon, at the time of his death, was a scholar athlete, excelling baseball and basketball at Grace Christian Academy in Franklin, Tennessee. Quote, one of his former teammates, quote, he was the hardest competitor I've ever played with in my life. He backed down from no one, and he was someone you tried to emulate, especially on the baseball field. His sister, Gracie, referred to him as her protector. He had received a lot of interest from Division I colleges to play baseball.
Everyone loved him.
All right, we'll start with means and opportunity, the morning of the accident. Grant leaves his home in Franklin, Tennessee at approximately 7:37 for a 50-mile drive to the Ward Performance Institute. He arrives at approximately 8:27, 8:41, around there. Temperature 90 degrees, so it's a hot day. Grant exits his vehicle, 2015 Tacoma pickup truck, walks to the back of his vehicle to retrieve a gym bag with his baseball gear to include his glove, which is in the exposed bed of the truck. According to Aaron's statement to the police, it should be noted that Aaron changed his story days later to say that Grant retrieved his baseball gear from the driver's side back seat of the truck.
Also big here is a few months after this, after he already gave his report to the police department that him and Aaron arrived at the training center. A few months later, he said that no, what happened was they met 15 miles away at Veterans Parkway in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, and then they both drove to the training center. So that's a glaring inconsistency.
All right.
So to remain objective in Aaron's defense, he was under a great deal of stress during this incident and could have made a mistake. But if that's the case, if he made a mistake and said that Grant's gear was not in the bed of the truck, but it was in the side of the truck behind the driver's seat, then how did the vehicle run him over? He's at the side of the vehicle. That's a huge inconsistency.
Well, the whole type of accident, I mean, I'm sure when they reconstructed the accident, it was fascinating. We'll talk about that in a minute.
I'm going to let the cat out of the bag here, Dave. We're going to get into this in greater detail, but it wasn't a true accident reconstruction by law enforcement. That's the huge issue here.
That is
we're going to get into that in a minute.
Yeah, that is a huge issue, and we should get into that. So let's talk about the inconsistency.
So you're a former baseball player.
I am.
And baseball players that I spoke to, I said, would you ever leave your glove, your bat in the exposed elements, meaning the sun, the heat, the rain? Would you ever leave it exposed? Someone could steal that from you. I wasn't a good baseball player.
Right.
When I played baseball, I had my glove. It was a great glove, and I was able to do well at third base with that glove when I wasn't sitting on the bench, Dave. The minute I got a new glove, because I outgrew that glove, it didn't have the same feel for me. So baseball players being very superstitious, and those are the tools of their trade, they will protect that. And also, Angie, his mother, said he never left his glove or his gear in the back, in the open bed of a truck. He always left it in the cab. So that's a huge discrepancy, because it goes to, was he behind the truck or was he to the side of a truck? Now, this is the tools of their trade. They protect that from theft and the elements.
Let's take a look at the next thing. For the sake of argument, let's assume that Grant was at the rear of the truck, and for some unknown reason, the truck began to roll backward on that incline. And at some point, Grant became trapped under the truck. The truck continued to roll backwards, approximately 60 feet on a rocky asphalt surface, dragging Grant for the entire distance. 60 feet. That's a long distance to be dragged.
Under a 4,000-pound truck.
Now, at the bottom of the incline, the truck dropped a considerable distance to its final resting spot on a large rock-filled ditch on the side of the road. So now, Grant is trapped under the truck, more toward the front of the truck, lying on his back, barely clinging to life at this point. So before we go any further, there are two main factors in this case that need to be addressed. One is the truck, and two is the injuries.
First of all, the truck and its safety record. 2015 Toyota Tacoma pickup truck with an automatic transmission. Average vehicle weight is between 3,600 and 4,200 pounds. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration gives this truck a 5-star safety rating.
And again, at this stage, 2015 and 2020 is only going to be 5 years old. So it's a fairly new truck. It's a good truck.
And there's no significant safety recalls, especially a safety recall in regards to a truck rolling back from a park position, in park. And we know it's in park because we have photos showing that it was in park. So this comes to the fourth inconsistency, and this is probably one of the biggest inconsistencies in this whole story. An independent agency performed an analysis of Grant's truck and found that the transmission parking pawl, PAWL, was not defective and should have prevented the vehicle from rolling backward from a park or an in-park position. So if it's not defective, then how did it roll?
And we've talked about the fact that there were advocates for further investigation. There are some people that say this was not an accident. These are the people who paid for the investigation, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And the cops didn't do it. The police.
We're gonna get into that very shortly. So let's stand by on that one.
Let's look at Grant's injuries. After being dragged over 60 feet under a 4,000-pound moving vehicle and then falling back a few more feet into a large rock-filled ditch, a logical person would assume that there would be numerous injuries to Grant's body. He would be scraped, he would be dragged, he would have raspberries all over his back or back or front or whatever it was that was between.
It would have been his back. Yes.
Okay.
At least the majority would have been the back, but it could have been anywhere, obviously.
And he had none. He had no road rash.
No road rash.
No torn clothing.
No torn clothing.
No scuffs or torn areas on his sneakers, which he would have put down as a break. No burn marks from the undercarriage of the truck, even though the truck had just driven, 50 miles, we said?
50 miles, so probably around 50 minutes.
So it would have been a hot engine.
Hot engine.
But there were no burn marks on his body.
No burn marks. And basically, just to give you a little science behind burns, the average vehicle, you drive it for an hour, 45 minutes, it's going to be around the bottom of the truck. Your catalytic converter, your muffler, the engine block area is going to be around 200 degrees. The outside temperature at that time, at a historical temperature, look back, was around 90 degrees. So that truck is not going to cool down in a few minutes. You want to know how many degrees it takes to burn your body, Dave? Metal? 160.
Okay.
At least 160. So we're assuming it was at least 160, a lot closer to 200 degrees. So there should have been some burn marks on him if he's under that truck. The truck's rolling on him, it's dragging him, his body is going against the truck. He should have had at least 1 or 2 burn marks. He had none.
So the clothes aren't torn. He had a
Gold necklace.
A gold necklace.
That wasn't damaged, wasn't broken off, it was still intact.
Any injuries?
Well, the only injury that he had, and this obviously contributed to the cause of death, was in the back of his head, blunt force trauma, bleeding from the scalp, the nose, and the ears. Now, if they didn't happen, and this is the question here, if these injuries did not happen as a result of a motor vehicle accident, as a result of him being dragged 60 feet on a rocky asphalt area, then how did they happen? What's the sinister explanation here? Or is there a sinister explanation?
Well, the sinister explanation, if there was one, obviously, is that he was killed.
We're gonna get into motive.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna tell you a little story. Probably 2 years ago, I was out walking, probably going about 5 miles an hour. It was in the winter, and I saw a little patch of ice on the grass, and then the grass went right into asphalt. I hit that little patch of ice, and I got propelled forward. I'm 6 feet tall, 6'1", got propelled forward. I'm stumbling across the asphalt, trying to gain control of my body. I fall onto the asphalt. I scrape my left knee. I scrape both of my hands. I slam into the asphalt and I break a rib. 5 miles an hour, Dave. I probably traveled 15 feet. The scenario we just talked about, Grant, I believe he was around 6'3", being dragged down a hill 60 feet on the same asphalt that I fell on at about 5 miles an hour, and those were my injuries. So for him to have no injuries other than the blunt force trauma to the back of his head, your radar should be really engaged at this point.
It's fascinating. This brings us, I think, to the police. The Gallatin Police Department's response to this incident. We've hinted at it before. Let's just set the tone. Let me set the tone for you. Aaron calls 911 at 8:44 a.m. 8:48, the police arrive with EMS. At 9:41, the last police officer leaves the scene. So less than an hour.
57 minutes, Dave. You want to know how long it took for me in the past week to research and write this podcast? It took me 30 hours, and it took them 57 minutes to do a less than adequate accident investigation, and we're going to get into that.
So let's talk a little bit about this police department. Population of the town is 46,000 people.
And that's very similar to the community that we're in right now. So 46,000, they should probably have between 50 and 70 patrol officers. I know what they do have. They have 7-member command staff, which consists of a chief, a deputy chief, and 5 captains. I went on their website. I looked at their bios.
And they look good.
They look excellent. They look very professional. They have, a lot of them went to the FBI Academy for advanced training. They have at least one guy with a law degree, a few master's degrees. They have a certified crime analyst. We actually went to the same crime analysis training. It's a college out of California. And very important, this is a huge, huge factor. They have a fatal accident reconstruction investigator on their department.
So they should be able to reconstruct, or they should have an interest, or they at least have the education to know when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate to investigate a fatal accident.
Because my first question was, is this a small southern police department with only a few police officers?
That's exactly what I thought.
And they just didn't have the manpower or the training to even identify this type of a accident. But no, that's not the case. They're as professional as any other police department anywhere in the country serving that population. They have all the training, all the education. So what happened probably shouldn't have happened. So I'm just going to give you a by the book how police officers should respond.
Yeah, this is law enforcement 101, and this is what we've talked about over and over and over again. What they should never do is take the word from the only person on the scene of an incident in which there's a victim who is seriously injured or may die, such as in this case, because sometimes the last person you saw is the person who killed you.
Yeah, so the last person there is either a really, really good innocent witness or to some degree they're involved.
Right.
The officers need to remain objective, and regardless of what a witness tells you, Dave.
A witness who could be suffering a horrible loss
Absolutely.
of his child.
But also could be a witness who's manipulating the situation to make you go in one direction. So cops always have to be objective. They have to look outside the box. They have to be abstract thinkers and look at every case, from a domestic to a robbery to a shoplifting to a stolen car. And in this case, a death, not an accidental death, but possibly a homicide. You must always remain objective.
And so this, and again, this is a department that has training, that has people. The fact they have a fatal accident investigator in the department, you would think that there's at least an awareness that this is the way they
but
should
you want to know
respond.
something? If they didn't have one, the Tennessee Highway Patrol has accident investigators. And there's over 1,000 fatal accidents in Tennessee per year. That means those accident investigators are highly seasoned, highly trained, and probably exceptional in their job. So it's very easy to pick up a phone, give them a phone call. Those guys will come right out and they'll hopefully do a very thorough and professional investigation, come to some conclusion, which we're going to kind of get to momentarily.
Let's take a look at how the responding officers did handle this call. They arrived on the scene within 4 minutes of the 911 call, which is good. They rendered aid to Grant and did their best to provide life-saving efforts.
That's always a priority.
Yeah.
You go to any scene, obviously you need to secure it if possible, but your main focus when it's a life or death situation, you have to go and render appropriate medical care. In this case, that was their first priority.
Okay, and they spoke to Aaron for a few minutes. At that point, he's the grieving father. They're trying to save the kid. All of this is basically appropriate.
Yeah, they're trying to be compassionate and sympathetic to his plight, so they're not necessarily going to grill him and interrogate him. But at some point after this incident, they should have pulled him back to the station where they can control the environment. They control the questions, and they try to make a more accurate determination on what happened.
And as a reporter, he should understand that this is how it's done.
That's the protocol.
And it should all be very polite and professional, and that's the protocol.
This is where it went bad. I believe that they probably had faith and trust in Aaron's initial statement, and they were possibly influenced by his celebrity status and his cunning and articulate ways. If you believe it's not an accident and it's something more sinister, then he conned them, the responding officers, into believing his side and the only side of the story.
They dropped the ball.
Absolutely,
by not
did.
by not investigating a little.
And you know something? They had just followed 4 very basic steps that this whole mystery surrounding Grant's death could have been solved somewhere shortly after July 20th.
So what are the 4 steps?
4 steps would be secure the crime scene, isolate Aaron, speak to him more thoroughly, to call an accident reconstruction specialist, call a supervisor. If what you're observing as a patrolman and you don't have a lot of experience, call a supervisor in. 3 or 4 steps. If they had done that, this whole case would have gone in a totally different direction.
Let me ask you this question. They call in the accident reconstruction specialist.
That could take
bring the guy
that could
back.
take 10 hours. They would secure the whole scene. They'd do measurements. They'd bring in forensics. They'd do blood analysis. An autopsy would have been done. They would have impounded the truck. A lot of things would have been done. On scene, I would say probably 4 or 5 hours minimum. And then the accident investigator would go back and do all his calculations. Could take him another 20 hours. Like I said, it took me 30 hours, Dave, to do this. And we're doing a podcast.
Yeah.
We're looking at some of the evidence. They did the bare minimum. They did 57 minutes of less than professional police. We're going to dissect that.
All right, let's take a look at this. And now let me ask you this question, because you're getting this stuff from various sources. According to the information you've got, there were no scrapes on the body. There were no scrapes on the sneakers.
I have pictures. There was a professional accident reconstruction done to a certain degree of the truck and other factors related to this. What we're concluding here, or what we're presenting to you, the listener, to possibly conclude, something does not look right here. You must look at this more thoroughly, and you must do a complete investigation.
Okay, let's look at what they've missed by not performing this thorough investigation originally. If Grant's truck had rolled backwards, the tire tracks would have been evident at the entry point into the ditch. Is that true?
Absolutely. The foliage in that area, it hadn't rained for at least a week
Okay.
prior to that
So it's
accident.
going to break up the...
So it's dry, it's brittle, the grass is green, some of it's dead. So as the truck is rolling backwards, you should see tire tracks rolling in a certain direction. What they actually saw, tire tracks coming in the opposite direction. If they were going north to south, down a hill, top to bottom, you would see north to south tire marks. What was on that scene was south to north tire marks, which makes someone believe that the truck was actually drove into the ditch from the opposite direction. Also, there was a plastic milk carton underneath the truck that wasn't rolled over. That also tells you that if it was rolling backwards, it would have rolled over the milk carton. But it looked as though the truck was coming forward the opposite direction, and it stopped at the milk carton. But let's go back up for a sec. If we're alluding to the fact maybe Grant wasn't dragged down the hill, maybe Grant was assaulted at the base of that hill, he fell forward, and then someone drove the truck over him to make it look as though he was dragged down the hill. That's a staged crime scene.
I think this is sort of what we've been hinting at, or I don't even know.
We're hinting at it.
I don't even know if we'd say hinting, but this is what we've been saying. We've been leading to since this thing started, is that he was never dragged down the hill by this in an accident. This was a staged accident scene.
And I've been to staged accident scenes.
Have you really?
Not homicides, just minor insurance fraud accidents.
Okay.
And they're very obvious based on the damage of the vehicles, the direction of impact, and the so-called injuries on the reporting party.
Speaking of damage to the vehicle, this leads us into the next thing. There was no damage to the undercarriage of the truck.
No, there wasn't. And those rocks underneath that truck were big enough to possibly tear the muffler, the catalytic converter. The wheels were fine on that truck. The rims were fine in that truck. Let me give you a story. I was driving a cruiser one day, going to a motor vehicle accident. All the fire trucks were behind me in the ambulance. So I pulled my cruiser to the right side of the roadway. And there was a piece of metal sticking up on the roadway about 6 inches. I drove the cruiser over that metal, tore the muffler, tore the catalytic converter. Luckily, I didn't tear the gas tank. This was only a 6-inch piece of metal. These were big rocks. There was a lot of rocks. There wasn't 3 rocks. There was probably 200 rocks there, Dave.
Okay.
So for no damage to have occurred, it just doesn't sound possible. So the truck's coming down the hill, Dave, at whatever speed it was coming down. There's 2 spare tires in the truck. It jumps the curb and goes into a ditch. Those tires hadn't moved. Some of Grant's personal items in the front cab of the truck hadn't moved. The tires were at a 90-degree angle. If a truck is rolling down the hill straight, it's going to continue to go straight. The tires have to be in line with each other. But when the truck was in the final resting position, they were at a 90-degree angle. How does a truck go backwards with the tires in a 90-degree angle?
And we're talking about the front tires.
The front tires, yes. The keys were found in the ignition and the vehicle was in park. And this brings us to no autopsy or forensic exam of the truck. So these are the 2 biggest pieces of the puzzle in regards to what actually happened to Grant. If the responding officers and department supervisors had declared this an accident as suspicious in nature, they could have sent Grant's body to the state medical examiner for an autopsy to determine the cause of death, accident, or homicide. They also could have had his vehicle impounded, conducted a forensic exam to determine if it had any mechanical defects that would have caused it to unexplainably roll backwards. We really could go on for quite a while about the failures of the initial investigation by the Gallatin Police Department. But there's one final bit of information that every cop should know. has to do with Grant's belonging. And I learned this the hard way.
Okay.
So Grant's belongings, some of his belongings, his goggles, hat, and cell phone were left at the scene. Let me go back to my story as a young rookie officer. I went to a drug overdose. 18-year-old girl. She was in a drug house. We went there. She was deceased. They transported her body to the hospital. We did a small little search of the area, not a big search, but we didn't do a good enough search because a few hours later, we're back at the station writing our report, and her parents show up at the station. They knew she was deceased. They were looking for her belongings. More specifically, they were looking for her high school graduation ring. We didn't have it. So we went back to the house and we found out that one of the other roommates and one of the other girls that was staying there, also a drug addict, had stolen the ring and sold the ring. So her parents never, ever got that ring back. So no matter how trivial something may seem at a scene, when someone dies, when a loved one loses someone, they want things to remember them by. A high school ring, his hat, his cell phone, his goggles, in this case, Grant's personal items. So the fact that 7 responding officers didn't do a thorough final exam or a final search of the scene, because if they had, they would have found those items in that ditch, in the grass area. They were pretty obvious. So it tells me their mindset. They were in, they were out, 57 minutes, they couldn't have been bothered. So this tells me that going forward, the Gallatin PD will never ever admit any incompetence or culpability in this case, because if they do, many members of that department will either be suspended or lose their job.
This is just amazing to me.
To me, as a cop, the fact that they left personal items tells me everything I need to know about this police department. Because a compassionate cop knows that loved ones, and I'll repeat it again, a compassionate cop knows that loved ones will be looking for personal items.
So this brings us to the final section.
This is motive.
Motive. If you think it's a tragic accident, no motive for a tragic accident, just an accident.
It's just an accident, there's no motive, there's nothing wrong with that situation.
But if you're saying, why would somebody want this person killed? We've got the allegations.
Absolutely. So let's go to the first one.
Are we going to go to the stranger?
Well, we always go to the unknown stranger. However, we also know that in any crime scene investigation, the least likely person to ever victimize anyone
is the one
is the unknown stranger.
Yeah, that we're all afraid of the. We being the populace is always afraid of the stranger. In this case,
did an unknown stranger come upon that scene when Aaron was in his car, allegedly looking at his text messages and his emails, and do something to Grant in that 15, 20, 30-second period of inattentiveness by Aaron? Did that actually happen? And I think in this instance, I think it's safe to say that we can logically dismiss the unknown motive in this story because as for time, it couldn't have happened. If there was some sort of assault going on, yelling, screaming, you would have heard it. You would have seen something. No matter how intently you were looking at your emails, you would have heard or seen something.
If you don't buy the accident scenario, you certainly can't buy the unknown, the stranger argument.
Absolutely. But we just throw that out there to be fair.
So let's take a look at the second one. If it wasn't a stranger,
that leaves the only other person present at the time Grant died, and that's Aaron. But the big question here is this: why would a father who is a respected member of the community, a respected member within his church, a close friend to law enforcement and to judicial and political leaders, want his son dead?
How about this? Insurance policy?
None that we know of.
Was he planning on suing Toyota?
Because basically his statement is that a Toyota truck, inadvertently slipped out of gear, rolled back, and killed his innocent son. Absolutely not. No one got sued here. Actually, to the contrary, Aaron drove his truck for over 7 months. The truck that took the life of his son due to it's a malfunction, if that's what we believe, as an accident. So would you drive a truck?
Yeah.
You knew it had just killed someone?
I wouldn't drive a truck because of the memory. I'd be grieving my son enough.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't want to have his truck. It makes no sense.
That makes absolutely no sense.
But here's the other part of it. During that 7 months, there was an independent group that wanted a forensic examination of the truck done.
Absolutely. And there was no exam done during that time period. But what happened was the truck was placed into salvage due to an insurance type issue or an accident. It's a little vague.
So once they settle the insurance thing,
it goes to salvage, they sell it for parts. The family got wind of this, and this is when they had their independent investigation. Look at the truck. They determined no mechanical defect.
It never slipped out of gear when Aaron was driving it around for 7 months. It's strange.
Absolutely,
it's
it's
a strange detail.
strange. And again, I think it's safe to say that we can logically dismiss monetary gain as a possible motive.
And this brings us to the third one, which is the big one, which we had talked about at the very beginning of the show. We have a short clip from his daughter, Gracie.
My brother died protecting me from my father, Aaron Solomon. My father's a monster. It makes me want to vomit. I've been minimalized, but now I found my voice to be able to tell you that my father raped me, hurt me, and I'm not going to be a victim of this monster. He's a rapist, he's a molester, he's a liar, and he's a killer.
So that speaks for itself. And a little side note, if you want to listen to the whole video and audio, it's around 18 minutes long. You can get that on YouTube. Gracie's story, A Cry for Help.
And what Gracie, who's Angie's daughter and Grant's
Younger sister, yep.
alleges that her father abused her, alleges that he is a sociopath, and that he's responsible for the death of her brother.
Physical, domestic, sexual abuse. That is what's being alleged. More specifically, sexual abuse. And some of the big factors on this case is that many school and spiritual and law enforcement personnel who are mandatory reporters of domestic violence and sexual abuse have either refused to help this family or are just so incompetent that they can't help this family. So the question here is, why was Grant possibly targeted? Well, Grant made it known to people that when he turned 18 years old, in which he was 18 at the time of his death, he would be willing to testify against his father as to all the years of abuse that he allegedly had committed against his sister and mother. So therefore, to protect his lifestyle, his reputation, and most importantly, his freedom, Grant needed to be silenced. So the years-old motive, Dave, of eliminating a witness or witnesses to a crime may be behind Grant's suspicious death. It's our hope of doing this podcast that whoever is responsible, political leader, law enforcement leader, judicial leader, take a more in-depth look at this entire case and try to serve justice for Grant's family, for Angie and Gracie.
Oh, this was a horrible one.
Yeah, it's a sad one. It's a sad situation that hopefully can get better at some point.
So that's been it for Dave and Dale. And the Crime Solvers podcast and the Real Stories by Real Cops podcast. We'll be back with separate podcasts next week. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you.